don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I do want to offer this up because if things continue to play out, I think that Tim Banks, Tennessee's defensive coordinator, will have an opportunity to become a head coach following this season. I think he's done a masterful job. As a matter of fact, I think he did as good of a job as he could have in 23 and 22 when it seemed like they were giving up just a massive amount of yards, and it's easy to say, oh, that's just coaching. I think what we've learned is no, it's the Jimmies and Joes more than the X's and O's. Now, I think Tim Banks is going to have an offer within the next year or two, and I actually think it's going to come this year. So how concerned should Tennessee be that Tim Banks could potentially go elsewhere? Because this defense, if you look at what he has built in 2 years, has gone from embarrassing at times to dominant and elite now. That's pretty impressive.
It's very impressive, and Tennessee should absolutely worry about losing Tim Banks. This is – look, let's get something out of the way real quick because this is something that we've kind of learned with defense, and this is why it's hard to build a team defensively and why more people want to build teams offensively. You can overcome being less talented on offense with a good scheme. You can't do that on defense, right, Dave? You can't get away with not being as talented, and it's finally showing Tim Banks has the players. I think Tim Banks is going to get a lot of interviews because the narrative on Tim Banks is, one, most people believe that he's coaching with one hand tied behind his back as is because of how Josh Heupel, the tempo that Josh Heupel stresses, the number of possessions he wants to run. So most people are going to look at, many athletic directors are going to look at Tim Banks' numbers and be even more impressed than we are because they're going to be like, how did you do that with this offensive based system? How did you pull off these defensive stats? So I think that if Tennessee keeps this up, and y'all know what I predicted at the beginning of the year, I mean, Tim Banks is gone after this year. He's going to get a head coaching job somewhere.
Okay. So if you're Tennessee, do you look elsewhere? Or let me ask you this. We've seen this with Chip Kelly, and he's comfortable being a coordinator. Now, they're nowhere close in age, but he's comfortable being a coordinator and leaving a mess at UCLA. And he's now a coordinator, offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Can you pay him enough to stay, or does it depend on the job? And then we'll talk about if they do, who I think the natural replacement would be.
I think it depends on the job. I think that particularly with coaches, and I will say this, and there's actually been a movement, and I know this with a lot of leaders in the community, particularly with African-American coaches. There has been a push for them to not take certain jobs in college football because, Dave, as you know, oftentimes historically, I don't know if this is as much the case now, but there was a historical issue where when African-Americans did get head coaching opportunities, they were the worst possible jobs you could take. Right.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And they would take them out of desperation. I still go back to the Charlie Strong thing. He should have gotten an earlier shot. Now, he turned out not to be the best head coach in the world, but he should have gotten an earlier shot. And I was told way back when at the time, but it shouldn't have been the time to stereotype and be racist. But I was told that the big sticking point with him was that he had a Caucasian wife, and that was the big sticking point. I mean, I would hope that nobody would think that sort of thing anymore. I would hope that Florida would look at a Tim Banks and say, wow, he can keep us in games with the defense. And as long as he goes out and hires an offensive guru guy, then you're okay with that. Because look at what he did with when he had players. Look at this secondary. The defensive front is fantastic, but the secondary has done a great job. Jermod McCoy, yes, was a fantastic pickup, and he was going to be good no matter where he went. But look at what he's turned Will Brooks into. I mean, we kind of giggled and snickered that Will Brooks, a walk-on, would actually be a starter, but he's a good one now. And Ricky Gibson is a great example of a guy that has developed under him. So I don't think that, well, first, obviously, no school should be afraid to hire him because he's black. I mean, obviously, but I don't think you should be afraid in this day and age just because it's an offensive sport right now to hire a defensive sport. Because I've mentioned this before. I think football's kind of evolving a little bit, and you're going to see more teams do what Michigan did last year. So Tim Banks can make you that type of team. It might not be as easy to sell. Danny White might not like it because you're not scoring 50 points every Saturday. But I think Tim Banks would be a great head coach.
Oh, I agree. And so where I was going with this is, again, I'm with you. I don't think it's as much of a problem now as it was, but I think there's a movement there's a concerted effort among black coaches themselves to not take certain jobs, because you realize now if you take those jobs, it derails you. I mean, and Derek brought up a great point. Sylvester Croom took the Mississippi State job.
Great point.
You never should have taken that job. Terrible job when he took that job in 2004. And yeah, and so I think Tim Banks, and this is where I think Tennessee may be able to keep Tim Banks, is I think Tim Banks is going to be very particular about what job he takes. And at that point, the money could lure Tim Banks to stay. Now, you're right. If Florida comes calling, I think he's taking the Florida job. If there's a lot of other jobs where if USC comes calling, he's taking the USC job. Heck, if Oklahoma comes calling, he may take the Oklahoma job. But what if it's a smaller program? What if Florida? I mean, what if you can think of a school. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there's plenty of schools. What if they come calling? He may not be. It may come down to what would Tennessee offer, and at that point, Dave. I mean, we'll get to who they should replace him with in a second, but I'd open the checkbook up to keep Tim Banks. Honestly,
I would too. I would make him. I'd make him a $2.5 million coordinator.
I would too. Absolutely.
I mean, I would have no issue with that whatsoever. Now, if I would have asked you this last year, and it's our poll question, don't look at it, but it's our poll question that we want you to vote on. If I were to ask you this, let's say middle of the year last year, when suddenly Tennessee's offense seems like they're only throwing wide receiver screens, and everybody says that it's Alex Golesh, and that's why he's gone now to South Florida, and that's why they're having an issue. What would be the bigger loss, Tim Banks or Alex Golesh that has left? I don't even think it's close, because I think this is Josh Heupel's offense.
Yeah, I think Tim Banks would absolutely be the bigger loss. Now, I say that with this. I said Joey Halzle's gets a pass for 2023. I don't think what happened in 2023 is his fault. But there have been some red flags in the sense of, you can tell that Alex Golesh and Josh Heupel worked together a lot. The same with Jeff Lebby and Josh Heupel before that when he was at UCF.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure Joey Halzle and Josh Heupel work together, Dave. I think Josh Heupel just devises the game plan on his own. It's almost like Halzle is just a coordinator in name only. So is it hurting Tennessee's offense that Josh Heupel doesn't have another voice in the room helping him maybe think of something he hasn't thought of? Because Golesh did that. You're seeing that at USF. By the way, that's why Tim Banks wouldn't get the Florida job, because if you're Florida, I would hire Alex Golesh before Tim Banks, just because Alex Golesh is that good of a coordinator, and he's in Florida right now.
Right.
But
whole question, where do we stand on that? Do people agree with us? Because the middle of last year, let's be honest, guys, everybody in the chat, you would have said Golesh was a monster loss, and that's the problem with the offense. It wasn't. I've told you what the problem with the offense was, is accuracy at the quarterback position, but I don't want to go down that road. And that's why they had to throw all those long screens. That was not like Josh Heupel just came in and said, hey, everybody, I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
That's not what happened, Caleb.
No, not at all. I think it was just Alex Golesh added a couple of elements in that made the offense more complete. And now, and the majority are saying right now, yes, Banks is better between Banks and Golesh, like 71% to 29%.
Yeah, would that number have been flip-flop in November of last year?
Probably, but they would have been wrong even last year, because I wasn't holding anything against Halzle last year. I don't know if Banks is a better defense coordinator than Golesh is an offensive coordinator. I think Golesh might be better, but I think just relative to, put it this way, who you can get, I think may be more difficult. Tim Banks, I will say this. I talk about not taking bad jobs. I was shocked he left Penn State for Tennessee, knowing what Josh Heupel was going to do at Tennessee, because he could have hurt his profile. I don't know why. Maybe it was the idea that Josh Heupel told him he could get Rodney Garner, and that's why he's like, okay, I could help myself that way. Because Dave, if you're a defensive coordinator, if you're an aspiring defensive coordinator, would you ever take the Tennessee job?
Well, I wouldn't have then. You make a good point, but now I've seen it evolve. And let's face it, too. Tim Banks, I mean, Tennessee could go 10-2 this year, 10-2 next year in two very different ways. Their offense could put their defense in a tough spot like they've done before, and then suddenly the defense ranks towards the bottom in the nation as they've done before. It wasn't that long ago, just 2 years, guys, that Tennessee's defense was in the hundreds of overall defenses. So, yeah, I think that Banks would be the heart and soul of your offense. Now, would Tennessee, if they needed to, would they stay in house? Because they love to do that. Well, I'll tell you this. I thought when he was hired that William Inge, not to say he would be as good, but he's named the co-defensive coordinator now, linebackers coach. He has been a coordinator on his own at previous places, and he's been a coordinator on his own, not a co-coordinator at places that like to throw the football around. We talk about good moves, like if Tennessee's going to run that screen pass over and over, or if Tennessee's going to do this, that. But you talk about a smart move and being ahead of the curve. Josh Heupel hiring Inge is an incredibly smart move. Any debate there?
No, I actually agree with you. I think Josh Heupel hiring Inge was a great move. Particularly, we're seeing the upgrade at linebacker Tennessee has right now, although I think that's more player-based than it is coordinator coaching based, but that's just me. But you're right. William Inge has failed in the past as a defense coordinator. Let's just call it what it is. He got fired at 2 other defensive coordinator not fired, but at the very least demoted. So he was at Buffalo in 2011, 28-10 in 2011, and he got fired. Now the coach ended up getting fired himself by Danny White later. And then he was at Indiana from 2013 to 2015. And when Tom Allen got there, he got demoted to special teams and linebackers coach. Then he went to Fresno State and became the defensive coordinator with Kalen DeBoer. And weirdly, he left Fresno State for Washington and accepted a demotion at Washington. So it's weird that in 3 times he's been a defensive coordinator, Dave, he's either gotten fired or demoted. Although the last one, I don't know if he maybe just accepted the demotion because Kalen DeBoer was able to get a more big name hire by going to Washington as opposed to Fresno State.
I don't think you ever just accept a demotion.
Well, would you rather be a linebacker? But would you rather be a defensive coordinator at Fresno State or a linebackers coach at a Power 5 school? Would you rather be a coordinator at a Group of 5 school or a position coach at a Power 5 school?
Well, recruiting's brutal, so I would say a coordinator.
Okay.
I mean, I think that the position. Oh, I know the position coaches have to recruit like a bear, and a coordinator's usually not quite as much.